The fluorescent lights flickered ominously above the emergency room, casting a harsh glow on the chaos below. In a corner, a single dad named Tom sat hunched over in a plastic chair, his hands trembling as they clasped a crumpled hospital bracelet. The muffled sounds of hurried footsteps and distant cries echoed in his ears, but all he could focus on was the pinched expression of the doctor who had just left his son's bedside. Tom's heart raced, a mix of dread and helplessness choking him. He was nobody here, just another face in the crowd, waiting for news that felt like it would never come. Across the room, a woman stood in stark contrast: Isabella St. John, a billionaire widow cloaked in designer fabric and an air of indifference. She surveyed the scene, her expression cool and detached, as if the suffering around her was merely a backdrop to her own world. Her phone buzzed incessantly, a reminder of deals made in glass towers, far removed from the reality that clung to Tom like a second skin. When their eyes met, she saw the weight of his despair etched across his face, and for a brief moment, the distance between them felt insurmountable, a silent chasm filled with unspoken understanding. Tom had always embraced the simplicity of life. He worked at a local car repair shop, where the scent of engine oil and rubber was as familiar to him as the soft laughter of his son, Jake, who was still too young to understand the gravity of their current situation. For years, Tom had dedicated himself to ensuring Jake had everything he needed: healthy meals, a warm home, and most importantly, a father who would always be there. His sacrifices often felt monumental, yet they were rendered mundane in the rhythm of their daily lives. He'd turned down promotions and opportunities that would have pulled him away from their small but profound routine, believing fervently that presence was more vital than material wealth. When Tom looked back at the choices he had made, he remembered his own father, a man swallowed by ambition and work, always absent at the dinner table. Tom had vowed not to repeat that cycle. He had given up his dreams of being a mechanic with a signature shop, feeling the gnawing ache of ambition twist into something that resembled guilt whenever he contemplated it. Instead, he poured his heart into his relationship with Jake, teaching him how to ride a bike, coaching him on the soccer field, and listening to his fantasies with the reverence a painter might offer to a masterpiece. But now, surrounded by sterile white walls and the relentless beeping of machines, it felt as if all that love could crumble like brittle paper. As he sat there, clutching the bracelet as if it were a lifeline, the world around him faded into the background. The bearded doctor's expression lingered in Tom's mind, a tight-lipped harbinger of bad news he had come to dread. Waves of memories crashed against his heart, each moment shared with Jake a reminder of what was at stake. The way his son's eyes lit up at the mention of pizza on a Friday night, or the way he'd snuggle in for a movie marathon, every shared laugh and whispered secret made Tom's breath hitch in his throat, grounding him in the reality that he was fighting for more than just a life, he was fighting for memories yet to be made. Tom's shoulders trembled as he felt tears gathering in his eyes, but he fought them back. His son needed him to be strong, and he had no choice but to be that man. The trembling of his hands was a statement, an unspoken pledge that he would not give up on Jake, even as despair loomed in every corner of the emergency room. He would endure this pain, however fierce it was, and shelter his son with the hope of brighter days ahead. In that plastic chair, surrounded by a whirlwind of tragedy, Tom found an unexpected reservoir of strength coursing through him, one that whispered that love could overpower the darkness. Isabella St. John, cloaked in her tailored blazer and designer heels, exuded an aura of control and sophistication. Yet beneath the polished facade lay wounds that ran deep, scars hidden beneath layers of success that shone like a veneer over the chaos of her life. She had built her empire from the ground up, yet wealth had become her own gilded cage, a prison forged from the very ambition that had propelled her forward. As a young woman, she had witnessed her father, a charismatic entrepreneur, drown in unrelenting stress, leaving behind a void that Isabella filled with relentless drive. In becoming the CEO of a prominent tech company, she had embraced the thrill of power but ultimately unmoored herself from the warmth of genuine human connection. While her life glittered in public, privately Isabella felt the echoes of loneliness reverberating through her. Friends became mere acquaintances, lost in the shuffle of meetings and business deals. She attended charity galas and networking events, but every smile she wore felt like a mask, perfectly crafted yet devoid of authenticity. The vibrant social life she was meant to enjoy morphed into a monotonous cycle that left her feeling more isolated than ever. With every deal she finalized, every accolade she received, she hoped that fulfillment would fill the void. Yet, the emptiness loomed larger, a reminder that sadness could accompany success. As she stood amidst the clamor of the emergency room, the scene unfolded like a familiar script. Isabella found herself searching the faces around her, feeling a pang of unease as she recognized the raw emotion written across Tom's face. He was a stark contrast to the polished world she inhabited, where pain was concealed behind designer sunglasses and expertly crafted smiles. The delicate balance of her life felt increasingly fragile as she watched him, a father stripped bare by the fear of losing everything. For a fleeting moment, she felt an urge to reach out, to bridge the distance that seemed to stretch infinitely between them. Isabella's gaze softened as she contemplated the sacrifice etched into Tom's weary expression. It resonated deep within her, igniting memories of her own losses and the stillness that followed. In that haze of suffering, she was reminded that vulnerability could be a strength, a truth she had long buried beneath layers of ambition. She saw Tom for who he was, a body torn between fear and hope, a man willing to lay himself bare in order to fight for what mattered most. In that shared space of sorrow, a flicker of understanding ignited, one that made her question the very foundation of her own life. For the first time in a long time, Isabella felt the weight of her riches shift beneath her as she shifted her focus away from boardrooms and stock prices. Instead, she felt an inexplicable connection to Tom, drawn in by the silent pain of a stranger. The sterile air of the emergency room did nothing to quell the stirring of her conscience. The unspoken recognition hung heavily in her chest, urging her to step outside her comfortable existence and confront the fact that wealth could not shield her from heartache. In the depth of that chaotic moment, she realized that even the most insulated lives could be touched by tragedy, and sometimes, it was the simplest moments that mattered the most. The fluorescent lights buzzed above them, and the weight of silence pressed heavily on Tom's shoulders, deeper than the anxiety that knotted his stomach. He stared blankly at the hospital's chaotic tapestry, nurses scurrying past, patients wailing in agony, and families clinging to each other until a sharp voice broke through the murmur of despair. "Excuse me, is that your child?" Isabella asked, her tone clipped as she pointed toward the small waiting area that separated them from the pediatric wing. The remark caught Tom off guard, pulling him momentarily from his reverie. He nodded, still shaken, his heart pounding at the thought of what was unfolding beyond the walls. "You're making it difficult for me to have a conversation. Can you please take your seat somewhere else?" Her words, laced with irritation, felt like ice water splashed against his skin. Tom looked at her, disbelief mingling with anger, but he suppressed it. This was not the moment for confrontation, yet he couldn't help but notice the chilling gulf between their realities. With a measured breath, he replied, "I understand you're watching your time, but I'm not going anywhere. My son needs me." Isabella arched an eyebrow, her lips curling in disdain. "The world is not stopping just for your little drama." Yet, beneath the facade, a flicker of doubt began to surface. There was something about the poise in his voice, the unwavering commitment in his gaze that began to erode her conviction. "Drama?" Tom repeated, an edge of disbelief flooding his voice. "He's a kid, and he's fighting for his life. How can you miss that? Your world may be governed by quarterly earnings and targets, but mine is just a boy who deserves a chance." The words landed between them, heavy and uncompromising. Isabella was taken aback, feeling an uncharacteristic stir of guilt in her chest. A part of her wanted to dismiss him, to retreat behind her polished armor. But there was an unyielding resolve in Tom's demeanor, a calmness that radiated competence. It was as if he was carved from stone, shaped by adversities that had hardened him, yet refined his character. "Look," he continued, his voice steady, "I know you're wrapped up in your world of success, but this is real. I promise, if you give me just a moment, I can free up the waiting area and keep it quiet. I can manage it." He unfolded himself from the plastic chair, loosening his grip on the bracelet, and stepped forward, a subtle invitation for her to recognize the humanity underlying their differences. Isabella's arrogance faltered for a moment, watching as he moved with purpose, a quiet strength. As he began to engage the nursing staff behind the check-in counter, something shifted in her perception of him. His competency, a stark contrast to her expectations of a struggling single father, peeled back layers of her preconceived notions like paint flaking off an old wall. He exchanged a few quick words, seamlessly navigating the bureaucracy that usually tangled others. The nurses, recognizing the desperation in his eyes, responded to him with a warmth that caught Isabella's attention. It was as if he possessed an invisible tether, something more than just the breathing body of a father but an unspoken tenacity that spoke of battles fought in silence, a history stitched into the fabric of his being. As the exchanges unfolded, she felt her heart flutter dangerously against her ribcage. Tom turned back to her, a hint of satisfaction in his gaze, and she realized at that moment that the gravity of his anguish was interwoven with unwavering love. This man was not just a reflection of a chaotic life but an embodiment of resilience, the very thing she had forgotten in her quest for material greatness. Isabel stood rooted, grappling with the emerging understanding that perhaps their lives were more connected than she had ever dared to believe. Tom had taken a moment to gather himself after his brief exchange with Isabella. The sterile air of the emergency room felt more suffocating than ever, the weight of his responsibility pressing down like a heavy coat. He returned to his seat, heart still racing, and began to notice that Isabella had shifted her focus from her phone to the turbulent currents of the waiting room around them. They both sat in silence for a heartbeat, and then Isabella broke the stillness. "I didn't mean to be rude," she admitted, her voice softer now. I forget sometimes that there's more at stake than numbers and profits. I'm not sure how to make it hurt less." There was something raw and unguarded in her admission, a glimpse behind the well-crafted defenses that held her together. Tom glanced at her, taken aback by the vulnerability in her eyes. In that moment, he understood that beneath her poised exterior lay a woman grappling with her own kind of battle. "It's okay," he replied, the tension easing from his shoulders. "We all carry our burdens. You're not alone in that." There was an unexpected softness in his voice, an unspoken camaraderie blossoming in the midst of chaos. Their exchange hung in the air, fragile and tentative, but a thread of mutual understanding began weaving itself between them. Tom felt the heat of his emotions recede, and in its place flickered the recognition that perhaps he wasn't the only one trapped in a storm. Isabella shifted slightly, her posture relaxing as she watched him. "What if we made this a little more bearable for one another?" she proposed, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "What do you mean?" Tom asked, curiosity piquing. "I know this place, these hospitals, pretty well," she explained. "I've had my fair share of experiences here. Maybe you could help me navigate some of the bureaucracy in return." The notion of collaborating felt both bizarre and liberating. For the first time, he perceived her as more than just a wealthy stranger. She was someone who had walked through her own share of shadows, and perhaps they could lean on each other to get through this difficult night. Tom nodded slowly, his trust cautiously rekindled. "All right. You know the system, and I know how to talk to the nurses. Maybe we can make some headway together." He sensed a shift within himself as he opened up to the idea of working alongside her. They pulled their chairs slightly closer, creating their own makeshift strategy hub amid the surrounding turmoil. "What's your son's name?" Isabella asked, her voice suddenly mingling with a gentleness that caught Tom off guard. "Jake," he replied, grateful for the focus on something beyond his own anxiety. "He's a great kid, loves soccer more than anything." Isabella's expression softened, and she shared, "My father loved to play soccer too. It was one of the few memories I have of him, alive and laughing." For a moment, they navigated the fragile territory of shared vulnerability, acknowledging the pain of loss while celebrating the simple joys life could bring. It was a rare moment of connection, and Tom felt the distance between them begin to close, even as the chaos of the emergency room swirled around them. Their collaboration bore fruit as they exchanged tips on how to approach the medical staff, navigating the complexities of the hospital's maze. Tom articulated the intricacies of parental instincts while Isabella shared insights into the operational aspects of healthcare. Each realization deepened their respect for one another, a newfound recognition that their worlds, though vastly different, shared threads of responsibility and vulnerability. As they worked through the labyrinth of the hospital, they didn't just discover a way to communicate better, they were rediscovering pieces of themselves that had lain dormant beneath the weight of their lives. The fluorescent lights above continued to buzz, but within that small bubble of collaboration, they found solace in shared purpose in a chaotic world where both pain and hope existed side by side. Tom's voice trembled as he spoke, threading his way through the past that felt both distant and painfully present. "You know, I used to have big dreams," he began, his eyes focused on a crack in the hospital floor. "I was a kid with grease-stained hands and a heart full of fire. Cars were my passion, working on them made me feel alive. I was damn good, too. People would come from all over just to get their engines fine-tuned. I dreamed of one day opening my own shop, a place where I could turn rust into brilliance. He paused, savoring the bittersweet memories. But life has a way of steering you off course. My father, he was a mechanic too, and when he wasn't at work, he was drowning in the weight of expectations. Money was always tight, and he'd turn to the bottle when things got hard. Every time I heard the door slam and the familiar scent of whiskey fill the air, I knew we were in for another storm. I grew up thinking that success was what mattered most. At least, that's what I thought until I held my son for the first time. Tom's voice caught a falter in his bravado as the memory faded into the reality of his father's absence. When Jake was born, everything changed. I was determined to be different, to be present. I didn't want him to feel the void I grew up with. I took pride in being his dad, pouring everything into him. I turned down opportunities that could have taken me away, choosing to work late shifts just to keep our little routine alive. The weight of those words hung in the air, fragile and heavy, the acknowledgement of sacrifices made in love's name. He glanced at Isabella, searching her expression for understanding. But the truth is, I didn't just renounce a career. I gave up parts of myself too. Sometimes, I'd sit on the floor of our living room, watching him play, and feel this aching emptiness creeping in. It's like I traded my dreams for a paycheck, only to realize that this was the only version of success I knew how to embrace. I celebrated his little victories every day, teaching him how to ride a bike, coach him through soccer drills, and listen to his wild adventures, always hoping he would dream even bigger than I could. But inside, I wrestled with the ache of what might have been. Isabella's heart pounded as she listened, struck by the depth of his pain and the strength required to articulate it. Here was a man who had forged a life of love through loss, yet he wore that burden with grace. And then, Tom continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, the day came when I had to face my greatest fear, watching my son struggle. I can't even describe it, watching him hooked up to machines while I felt so utterly powerless. For a moment, the air was thick with unspoken sorrow. Isabella watched as he rubbed his palms together, as if trying to erase the chill of despair embedded in his skin. I never thought I'd end up in a place like this, surrounded by heartache, Tom said. I thought I could shield him from pain, be a fortress of strength. Instead, I'm just a man, scared and desperate, holding onto fragments of hope. His vulnerability reverberated in the sterile room, igniting layers of memories within Isabella. She thought of her own sacrifices, the way she had built not only a company but an entire identity around her success, an identity that kept her safe yet hollow. Underneath the designer clothes and the facade of control, she too wrestled with the notion of loneliness. The more she gained, the less she felt, yet she'd convinced herself that wealth filled the void left by her father's absence. In Tom's admission of vulnerability, she recognized a reflection of her own life, one tangled in ambition and void of connection. I suppose we both built our own cages, Isabella murmured, her voice carrying an unexpected heaviness. You fortify yours with love while I cloaked mine in power. The words felt like a revelation, unearthing a truth she had buried long ago. His eyes met hers, a flicker of acknowledgement passing between them, a stark contrast to the chaos around them. It was as if they stood at a precipice, each teetering on the edge of change. The realization settled in Isabella's chest, life was a tapestry woven from shared experiences, and perhaps, engaging with the pain would lead them both to a brighter thread they had yet to explore. I never realized how much I needed to hear that, she said softly, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her wealth lift, not as a loss, but as a space for something deeper. Tom's journey had shown her that strength could exist in vulnerability, and perhaps her own cages weren't as solid as she'd believed. Together, suspended between hope and despair, they were reshaping their views, crafting an unexpected partnership that began with the acknowledgement of their quiet struggles. Tom and Isabella lingered in their makeshift sanctuary of shared stories, an island of human connection in a turbulent sea of desperation. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed insistently, the chaos of the emergency room a relentless reminder of the stakes tethering them to this moment. Just as a fragile sense of understanding began to blossom between them, a sudden commotion erupted at the nurse's station, yanking Tom from his introspection. A nurse rushed past, her face pale and taut, and the air thickened with an unease that crackled like static electricity. Code Blue in Pediatrics, a voice blared through the intercom, followed by a flurry of footsteps as medical staff hurried towards the distant wing. Tom's heart seized at the words, a visceral terror gripping him as he instinctively squeezed the hospital bracelet in his hand tighter. The chaotic sounds of the emergency room faded into a dull roar as his focus turned inward, the weight of the moment crashing against him with the force of a tidal wave. "Tom, wait," Isabella said, her voice cutting through the fog. She reached for his arm, a grounding presence amidst the encroaching panic. "We have to stay focused. Your son needs you to be strong." The urgency in her tone was undeniable, and the depth of her gaze held a mixture of empathy and determination that pierced through his turmoil. Somehow, she recognized the fragility of the emotional space they had created, the unspoken deal that wove their paths together now threatened by the stark reality surrounding them. Tom swallowed hard, but he steadied himself. "I can't just sit here and do nothing." His voice rose, a mixture of anger and fear spilling forth as panic gnawed at his insides. The memories of Jake's laughter were suddenly overshadowed by the specter of loss, and he felt himself teetering on the brink of despair. "If anything happens, Listen to me," Isabella interjected, her voice unwavering. "You have to trust that he's in the best hands right now. You can't lose hope. You can't give in to fear." The calmness in her tone became an anchor, pulling him back from the edge. He looked into her eyes, searching for the strength to withstand the oncoming storm, and found not just resolve but a flicker of understanding, as if she knew all too well the weight of such vulnerability. They stood side by side, a fragile alliance forged in the fire of shared suffering, and Tom felt the stirrings of something deeper, a desire to break free from the heavy chains of his past. For too long, he had defined his worth by that sense of all-consuming responsibility, bending to the familiar pattern of isolation that had gripped him since childhood. Yet here, amidst the chaos of pain and fear, was an unexpected opportunity, the chance to not just fight for Jake but also to allow someone into the cracks of his heart. As they stood together, he glanced toward the pediatric wing, fear and hope wrestling within him, and made a decision. "You're right. I can't let this darkness swallow me. I want to believe he's safe. I need to believe that." In that moment, he felt a shift, a resolve to not just endure this night but to face it head-on, allowing Isabella's strength to seep into him like a balm for the wounds left by his past. Isabella, too, felt a change stirring within her. She had long upheld the notion of power as armor, brick by brick, constructing a reality where vulnerability was seen as weakness. Yet, standing beside Tom, she began to see a new perspective, a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly connect with others. "Then let's make it through this together," she said, her words firm yet tender. "You keep believing for both of us." Tom looked at her, a mix of gratitude and newfound respect filling the spaces between them. "You know, I thought I was alone in this fight," he confessed, the echo of his truth settling between them. "But I think I'm beginning to understand that strength comes from allowing others in." "Yes," Isabella agreed, "and it's not just about surviving. It's about finding ways to help others along the way, too." The thought resonated deep within her, a desire to reach beyond the confines of her own experience, to channel this moment into action for those who, like Tom, found themselves grappling with pain in silence. "You have to trust that your fight is worth it, for you and for Jake." Together, they turned toward the nurse's station, a renewed sense of purpose igniting within them. Tom straightened his back, the crumpled bracelet in his hand feeling less like a tether to fear and more like a connection to hope. Determined, he approached the nurses, his voice steady as he asked for updates on Jake's condition, wife and clarity intertwining. Isabella stepped beside him, her presence anchoring him as they sought answers, not just for themselves but for the countless others caught in the storm of uncertainty. As they navigated the chaotic energy of the emergency room, both Tom and Isabella began to recognize the power of shared vulnerability, a bridge that had been built in the depths of their pain. In embracing their scars, they discovered a profound strength, one that propelled them forward not only as individuals but as allies in a shared fight against the darkness that threatened to encroach upon their lives. The crisis tested their resolve, but it also forged a bond that neither of them had anticipated, one rooted in hope, empathy, and the understanding that even amidst chaos, they could lift one another from the depths, transforming silent pain into a collective vision of resilience. The chaos of the emergency room faded into a distant hum, punctuated only by the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional murmur of medical professionals. Tom stood at the nurse's station, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath, clutching the hospital bracelet in his hand, a lifeline tethering him to Jake. The hours felt like days, each second stretching into the next, but amidst the uncertainty, he held onto the flicker of hope ignited by Isabella's presence. As he waited for news, a small commotion drew his gaze toward a nearby family. A little girl, no older than 7, clutched a stuffed bear to her chest, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and innocence. She stood by her mother, her small fingers brushing the fabric of the bear, a silent testament to the comfort it brought her. In that moment, Tom felt the weight of his own fears shift slightly, an understanding washing over him. Children, even in their darkest moments, sought solace in the simplest gestures of love. Tom's heart ached as he watched the girl approach a nearby nurse. She raised her bear, a silent request for reassurance, and the nurse knelt down, whispering gentle words that seemed to envelop the child in a warm embrace. It was a small act, yet it resonated deeply within Tom, a reminder that kindness could pierce through the fog of anguish. In witnessing that innocent exchange, he felt a flicker of connection, a gentle nudge of empathy that transcended their circumstances. Isabella stood beside him, her gaze drawn to the same scene, and in that shared moment, they exchanged a glance, one that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. The understanding between them deepened, and for the first time, Tom sensed a quiet peace blossoming within the turmoil. The child's gesture echoed something profound. Even in the depths of fear, there existed a flicker of trust, an openness that transcended the pain they carried. Tom turned back to Isabella, and with a softened expression, he whispered, "We'll get through this." She nodded slightly, the corners of her lips lifting in a subtle affirmation. The shared weight of their struggles felt lighter, transformed by the innocence before them. In that small, chaotic room, as hope threaded through the spaces between them, Tom took a deep breath, realizing that sometimes, peace could be found in the simplest gestures, where understanding softened the edges of silent suffering. And as he clutched the bracelet tighter, it no longer felt like a burden, but a reminder that love, raw and unrefined, had the power to weave light into the darkest of moments.